Roman infantry tactics refers to the theoretical and historical deployment, formation and maneuvers of the Roman infantry from the start of the Roman Republic to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The article first presents a short overview of Roman training. Roman performance against different types of enemies is then analyzed. Finally, a summation of what made the Roman tactics and strategy militarily effective through their long history is given below, as is a discussion of how and why this effectiveness eventually disappeared. The focus below is primarily on Roman tactics, the how of their approach to battle, and how it stacked up against a variety of opponents over time. It does not attempt detailed coverage of things like army structure or equipment. Various battles are summarized to illustrate Roman methods with links to detailed articles on individual encounters. For in-depth background on the historical structure of the infantry relevant to this article, see Structure of the Roman military. For a history of Rome's military campaigns, see Campaign History of the Roman military. For detail on equipment, daily life and specific legions, see Roman legion and Roman military personnel equipment. Evolution. Roman military tactics and strategy evolved from that typical of a small tribal host seeking local hegemony, to massive operations encompassing a world empire. This advance was affected by changing trends in Roman political, social and economic life, and that of the larger Mediterranean world. But it was also undergirded by a distinctive Roman way of war. This approach included a tendency towards standardization and systematization, practical borrowing, copying and adapting from outsiders, flexibility in tactics and methods, a strong sense of discipline, a ruthless persistence that sought comprehensive victory, and a cohesion brought about by the ideal of Roman citizenship under arms, embodied in the legion. These elements waxed and waned over time, but they form a distinct basis underlying Rome's rise. Some key phases of this evolution throughout Rome's military history would include military forces based primarily on heavy citizen infantry with tribal beginnings and early use of phalanx-type elements. Growing sophistication as Roman hegemony expanded outside Italy into North Africa, Greece and the Middle East. Continued refinement, standardization and streamlining in the period associated with Gaius Marius, including a broader-based incorporation of more citizenry into the army, and more professionalism and permanence in army service. Continued expansion, flexibility and sophistication from the end of the Republic into the time of the Caesars. Growing barbarization, turmoil and weakening of the heavy infantry units in favor of cavalry and lighter troops. Demise of the Western Empire and fragmentation into smaller, weaker local forces. This included the reversal of status of cavalry and infantry in the Eastern Empire. Cataphract forces formed an elite, with infantry being reduced to auxiliaries. Equipment and training. See Roman military personnel equipment and Roman legion for more information on equipment, individual legions and structure equipment, individual weapons. Personal equipment and haulage. A legionary typically carried around 27 kilograms of armor, weapons, and equipment. This load consisted of armor, a sword called a gladius, a shield, 2 pillar and 15 days food rations. There were also tools for digging and constructing a castra, the legion's fortified base camp. One writer recreates the following as to Caesar's army in Gaul. Each soldier arranged his heavy pack on a T or Y-shaped rod, borne on his left shoulder. Shields were protected on the march with a hide cover. Each legionnaire carried about 5 days' worth of wheat, pulses or chickpeas, a flask of oil and a mess kit with a dish, cup, and utensil. Personal items might include a dyed horsehair crest for the helmet, a semi-water resistant oiled woolen cloak, socks and breeches for cold weather and a blanket. Entrenchment equipment included a shallow wicker basket for moving earth, a spadon, or pickaxe-like dolabra, or turf cutter, and 2 wooden staves to construct the next camp palisade. All these were arranged in the marching pack toted by each infantryman. Fighters traveled in groups of 8, and each octet was sometimes assigned a mule. The mule carried a variety of equipment and supplies, including a mill for grinding grain, a small clay oven for baking bread, cooking pots, spare weapons, water skins, and tents. A Roman sentry had a complement of 10 mules, each attended by 2 non-combatants who handled foraging and water supply. A sentry might be supported by wagons in the rear, each drawn by 6 mules, and carrying tools, nails, water barrels, extra food and the tent and possessions of the centurion commanding officer of the unit. Artillery package. The legion also carried an artillery detachment with 30 pieces of artillery. This firepower package consisted of 10 stone-throwing onages and 20 bolt-shooting ballistas. In addition, each of the legion's sentries had its own Scorpio bolt thrower, together with supporting wagons to carry ammunition and spare parts. Bolts were used for targeted fire on human opponents, while stones were used against fortifications or as an area saturation weapon. The catapults were powered by rope and sinew, tightened by ratchet and released, powered by the stored torsion energy. Caesar was to mount these in boats on some operations in Britain, striking fear in the heart of the native opponents according to his writings. His placement of siege engines and bolt throwers in the towers and along the wall of his enclosing fortifications at Alesia were critical to turning back the enormous tide of Gauls. These defensive measures, used in concert with the cavalry charge led by Caesar himself, broke the Gauls and won the battle, and therefore the war, for good. Bolt throwers like the Scorpion were mobile and could be deployed in defense of camps, field entrenchments and even in the open field by no more than 2 or 3 men. Training. Over time the military system changed its equipment and roles, but throughout the course of Roman history, it always remained a disciplined and professional war machine. According to Vegetius, during the 4-month initial training of a Roman legionary, marching skills were taught before recruits ever handled a weapon, since any formation would be split up by stragglers at the back or soldiers trundling along at differing speeds. Standards varied over time, but normally recruits were first required to complete 20 Roman miles with 20.5 kilograms in 5 summer hours, which was known as the regular step or military pace. They then progressed to the faster step or full pace, and were required to complete 24 Roman miles in 5 summer hours loaded with 20.5 kilograms. The typical conditioning regime also included gymnastics and swimming to build physical strength and fitness. After conditioning, the recruits underwent weapons training. This was deemed of such importance that weapons instructors generally received double rations. Legionaries were trained to thrust with their gladii because they could defend themselves behind their large shields while stabbing the enemy. These training exercises began with thrusting a wooden gladius and throwing wooden pila into a quintain while wearing full armor. Their wooden swords and pila were designed to be twice as heavy as their metal counterparts so that the soldiers could wield a true gladius with ease. Next, soldiers progressed to armatura, a term for sparring that was also used to describe the training similar one-on-one training of gladiators. Unlike earlier training, the wooden weapons used for armatura were the same weight as the weapons they emulated. Vegetius notes that roofed halls were built to allow for these drills to continue throughout the winter. Other training exercises taught the legionary to obey commands and assume battle formations. At the end of training, the legionary had to swear an oath of loyalty to the SPQR or later to the emperor. The soldier was then given a diploma and sent off to fight for his living and the glory and honor of Rome. Organization, leadership in logistics, command, control and structure. Once the soldier had finished his training, he was typically assigned to a legion, the basic mass fighting force. The legion was split into 10 subunits called cohorts, roughly comparable to a modern infantry battalion. The cohorts were further subdivided into 3 maniples, which in turn were split into 2 centuries of about 60 to 100 men each. The first cohort in a legion was usually the strongest, with the fullest personnel complement and with the most skilled, experienced men. Several legions grouped together made up a distinctive field force or army. Fighting strength could vary, but generally a legion was made up of 4,800 soldiers, 60 centurions, 300 artillerymen, and 100 engineers and artificers, and around 1,600 non-combatants. Each legion was supported by a unit of 300 cavalry. The equites, supreme command of either legion or army, was by consul or proconsul or a praetor, or in cases of emergency in the Republican era, a dictator. A praetor or a propraetor could only command a single legion and not a consular army, which normally consisted of 2 legions plus the allies. In the early Republican period it was customary for an army to have dual commands, with different consuls holding the office on alternate days. In later centuries this was phased out in favor of one overall army commander. The legatii were officers of senatorial rank who assisted the supreme commander. Tribunes were young men of aristocratic rank who often supervised administrative tasks like camp construction. Centurions commanded cohorts, maniples in centuries. Specialist groups like engineers and artificers were also used. Military structure and ranks. An in-depth analysis of ranks, types, and historical units including their evolution over time is beyond the scope of this article. See Structural History of the Roman Military and Roman Legion for a detailed breakdown. Below is a very basic summary of the legion's structure and ranks. Force structure: contubernium, tent unit, of 8 men. Centuria, 80 men commanded by a centurion. Cohort, 6 centuries or a total of 480 fighting men. Added to these were officers. The first cohort was double strength in terms of manpower, and generally held the best fighting men. Legion, made up of 10 cohorts. Field army, a grouping of several legions and auxiliary cohorts. Equites, each legion was supported by 300 cavalry, subdivided into 10 terma, auxiliar and velites. Allied contingents, often providing light infantry and specialist fighting services, like archers, slingers or javelin men. They were usually formed into the light infantry or velites. Auxiliar in the Republican period also formed allied heavy legions to complement Roman citizen formations. Non-combatant support, generally the men who tended the mules, forage, watering and sundries of the baggage train. Rank summary: consul, elected official with military and civic duties, like a co-president, but also a major military commander. Praetor, appointed military commander of a legion or grouping of legions, also a government official. Legatus legionis, the legate or overall legion commander, usually filled by a senator. Tribune, young officers, second in command of the legion. Other lesser tribunes served as junior officers. Prefect, third in command of the legion. There were various types. The praefectus equitarius commanded a unit of cavalry. Primus pilus, commanding centurion for the first cohort, the senior centurion of the entire legion. Centurion, basic commander of the century. Prestige varied based on the cohort they supervised. Decurio, commander of the cavalry unit or terma. Aquilifer, standard bearer of each legion, a position of much prestige. Signifer, one for each century, handled financial matters and decorations. Optio, equivalent to a sergeant, second in command for the centurion. Cornicen, hornblower or signaller. Imaginifer, carried standard bearing the emperor's image. Decanus, equivalent to a corporal, commanded 8-man tent party. Munifex, basic legionary, the lowest of the trained rank and file. Tirones, new recruit to the legions, a novice. Logistics: Roman logistics were among some of the best in the ancient world over the centuries, from the deployment of purchasing agents to systematically buy provisions during a campaign. to the construction of roads and supply caches, to the rental of shipping if the troops had to move by water. Heavy equipment and material were moved by pack animal and cart, while troops carried weighty individual packs with them, including staves and shovels for constructing the fortified camps. Typical of all armies, local opportunities were also exploited by troops on the spot, and the fields of peasant farmers unlucky enough to be near the zone of conflict might be stripped to meet army needs. As with most armed forces, an assortment of traders, hucksters, prostitutes and other miscellaneous service providers trailed in the wake of the Roman fighting men.